Willkommen beim 36. DOK.fest München, hier DOK.fest at Home 2021. Ich bin Sebastian Sorg und sitze jetzt hier ziemlich allein im Deutschen Theater. Ich weiß nicht, wo Sie gerade zuschauen, wo immer Sie sind. Und wir sind sehr froh, dass wir heute mit Esther Hertog und Paul King über Skies Above Hebron sprechen können. Dieser Film ist Teil von DOK Panorama und er ist natürlich auch für den Publikumspreis nominiert. Der BR3SAT Publikumspreis kann mit abgestimmt werden vom Publikum über die Webseite von DOK.fest München und die Teilnahmebedingungen sind eben auf der Webseite verfügbar. Jetzt bin ich sehr froh, dass wir Esther Hertog und Paul King hier bei uns haben. Welcome, Esther.
Thank you.
And welcome, Paul. So, you're now talking from the Netherlands and from France, and your film premiered as a world premiere in the Netherlands at ITFA last year, and is now an international premiere in Munich. Great to have your film here. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this theme and this issue? Because I think it's important to know what you did before Skies Above Hebron.
Well, to start off, we both grew up in Israel. I grew up from the age of 12 to 24, but I never visited a place like Hebron during my childhood because it's supposed to be a very dangerous place. It is. And when I started learning visual anthropology, I got really interested in conflict and in nationalism and in radicalism. So my first film, I decided for the first time in my life to go to Hebron and film the Israeli settlers, the settlers that live in Hebron. And they are perceived by the media and by a lot of Israelis themselves as the most radical settlers that there are in Israel and the West Bank. So I filmed 3 years there, the Israeli settlers. It was very, very difficult to do. And while filming there, of course, I saw a little bit of the Palestinians walking around in the streets, but I could never engage with them because it would give me problems with the settlers. Then I wouldn't be able to film the settlers anymore. So I had to stick with the settlers and I couldn't talk to the Palestinians. And once that film was finished in 2012, it premiered and it won prizes at ITFA and it did really well. After that, I really, really, really wanted to get to know the Palestinian side of the story. So Paul and I literally went to the other side of the same city, to the neighbors, and we lived with the Palestinian children, children growing up there.
And
yeah.
What during the filmmaking, what was your relation between you and Paul?
We are co-directors.
Okay.
Yeah. So I am a visual anthropologist, and my first film I did everything by myself, camera, sound, directing, everything. And on the Skies Above Hebron, we co-directed. We both did camera. I'm more the technical one. Paul is more the producer one and storytelling one. And we blended together our techniques and abilities to make Skies Above Hebron. Yeah.
So you were working with a small team, the two of you, or were you 3 people?
So we basically, the only way to work in Hebron was living inside families. And the only way to approach the topic was to be as small as possible. So it was just the 2 of us. We both operated camera. Because you're living in a quite traditional Islamic community, Esther would be the one to be speaking with the women, interviewing the women inside, and I'd be more like doing the things that Esther couldn't do, as in interviewing the men. And so working together as a team allowed us to have, as a small team actually, allowed us much more scope. It was a lot of work, doing the actual filming, doing the planning, production, the every evening, copying the material, making sure that you're technically up to date. So it was really very intense periods. We spent sometimes a couple of months or 20 days at a time, and then we had to go and keep coming back during the 5 years we were filming. But it was a definite collaboration. And also, if you think about visual anthropology and the traditional method of visual anthropology, which is observational filmmaking, and then you take traditional documentary filmmaking, which is, I wouldn't say so much scripting, but certainly having a very clear cinematographic idea, a very clear strategy to how you want the story, or how you can have, if you like, a beginning, a middle, and an end, so you can go back to your editor and actually make sense about how you'd like the film to develop. That was a real collaboration between the two of us, and I'm basically a traditional documentary filmmaker, and Esther's basically a very talented anthropologist. So, but during the process of making the film, we discovered how this works together, and yeah, I'm very, very curious to hear what you guys think about it. I'm not.
And we did work with also with a Palestinian translator, an amazing woman. Her name is Amna, and she worked very close with us, helping us with the Arabic, as our Arabic is quite basic. And she really, we had a few translators, but she is the main translator, and she worked very close with us, and she understood what we wanted to do, and she helped us a lot as well with making this film.
And how did you find those boys and those families, and how could you motivate them to stay for that long period of time with your project? Because during that 1 hour film, I'm watching three boys to really grow up and become young men. How did that work?
It was hard work. You go ahead, Paul.
Well, it's a very good question, and it's a very observational comment you're making, because indeed they grew up during the filmmaking. We were in these children's lives, in these families' lives, from the age of 9 till 14, which is a very transformational period in a child's life. A lot happens. They actually develop a brain, if you like, and they start to understand what's going on around them, and they start to respond to the situation that they live in. And we were there every year. We were there for months every year. So we lived inside the families. We lived inside the homes of the families. So we'd be getting up in the morning. We'd be hearing all the fighting at night. We had soldiers on our roof invading their home. It was literally a live-in situation in the conflict zone. But if you ask, how did we keep these children motivated? Well, it was just purely being there and not interfering.
Yeah,
I think, and sometimes
it also depended on which family. Marwan is a very serious kid, and Marwan understood the power of the camera, and he understood that by telling his story, he is helping Palestine. So for him, it was a very conscious collaboration. He wanted to be filmed. He wanted to tell a story. And he's still very willing, and he participated well. Anas and Amr, the boys with the pigeons, you'll get to know them. They were a bit more messy family, wonderful, crazy, mad family, and they sometimes were fed up with us, for sure. Yeah, but every time again we made friends with them, and sometimes sometimes we bought a pigeon. That helped a lot, and we had jokes, and Paul is very good in making jokes with them, and we lived in their house, and so it was we were very close to that family. That's how we somehow managed, and of course when they became teenagers it became sometimes very difficult, but we managed somehow. we just managed.
Of course, after having watched the film, you wonder, how are they doing now? I mean, the two brothers, we will understand at the end, they will, what happens to them, but how are they doing now? Is there anything you can tell us above the storytelling that we are watching now?
What we heard is that Marwan, he's doing really well. He is now working in a sweet bakery. He makes sweets, conditeur, the Palestinian types of sweets. He's still in he lives really difficult place, and there has been issues going on with the settlers, but he's doing well. He's working. His family is still good. It's very difficult now because it's of Corona. Everything is locked down. But he seems to be doing really all right. Yeah.
So as far as I know, Anas and Amr, well, Anas is Anas, and so shall it be. Amr apparently has a job now as a shepherd. So he's walking the Hebron hills with a flock of sheep, which I'm really happy to hear, because our concern with him at leaving school at the age of 14 and going straight into labor, into a building site, he had a sense of wanting to help his family out, but also just have money to be a teenager. And I personally think he's better off being a shepherd, so he's outside, but also this area is an extremely conflicted area. It's quite dangerous to be in the hills around there on your own as a child. And as Esther mentioned, of course, during the Corona time, the occupation has intensified, if I understand it correctly, that there's a lot less foreigners around, or filmmakers, or international observationists that can sort of keep an eye on the situation, so that the settlers are taking advantage of that. So that it's not an easy situation, and we're glad to know that the kids are doing okay. And of course, now they're getting to be 15, 16, so there's other priorities that come in now. But they're doing well, and that's the main thing. Just to go to the next stage, one of the things Esther and I really would like to do would be to go back to Hebron and show this film there. We have an idea to organize a mini film festival and bring in maybe other films from the Middle East, films like For Sama, films like that, and to show these films in Hebron, including our film. We feel a responsibility because we got to know everybody in the old city. They saw us coming and going for years, and it was a very friendly, a beautiful relationship. I mean, despite the danger, people really invited us home often for dinner, and we watched their children grow up. And so I'd really like to go back there with this film to show them.
So I have one question. You did one film on settlers, and then after that one film about the Palestinian neighborhood. Could you imagine that both sides, like both parts, could watch those films together?
My dream is, of course, that it would be possible. Realistically, I don't think the settlers are ready to even recognize their Palestinian neighbors as human beings, or at least as valued human beings. I don't think we can have, prepare popcorn and have drinks ready and go and have a screening together, and as everything is fine. Unfortunately, I don't think it's really realistic at this point. Having said that, I do hope that our films do create some more awareness for people to see each other and to learn from each other, and to see that Palestinians are just human beings like Israelis, and Israelis are just human beings as Palestinians. So in a way, I hope that our films create a bit more awareness. Maybe in the future they can watch the films together.
Actually, just to jump in on that point, Sebastian, for me, the reason I made this film is growing up in Israel, we didn't get to know our neighbors. And I think that that's an incredible problem when the conflict is so loaded, but you don't know who lives next to you. So the conflict, it's very easy for this conflict to worsen. So for me, making this film was a way to show Israelis, these are your neighbors. They have children like you do. They have the same issues you do. indeed to, as Esther said, to open up acknowledge each other, if you like. But Soldier on the Roof, now that's interesting because when the Soldier on the Roof was done, we went to Hebron and we showed it to Palestinians.
Yeah, that's true.
And that was really interesting because we showed it to all sorts of people. We had a lot of people in a room just opposite the settlement, so it was a bit edgy to do that, but it was really interesting. Maybe Esther, maybe you want to tell a little bit about that.
The Palestinians that saw my first film about settler soldier on the roof, they were actually quite surprised because they know the settlers only from the street or only when there's conflict. And in my film, I filmed them as, you know, family people and in their homes. And they were really surprised to see the inside of their homes and to see they're actually, you know, nice people, at least to each other. To me, they were nice. So they were very surprised to see another side of the settlers that they know. Yeah.
I'd like to ask you something about the way you're storytelling. Because many things that I saw in your film are not really explained, and there's no interview in which somebody is telling me more about his life or about conflicts or anything. Could you maybe specify, like, you are a visual anthropologist, so the way you're making films and your storytelling is done in a very strict way. Could you explain it a little bit and why you're doing it?
I wouldn't call it strict. I feel it's quite free. But visual anthropology, the technique of working is very much participant observation. So you go to a community or to a family and you live with them and you participate in their life and you become part of their lives in a way. So what we did, we really lived with the families. We didn't film all the time. We filmed a huge amount of hours, but it was very important to just get a natural connection with the family. And in a certain moment, whether you're there with a camera or without a camera, kind of disappeared. So we could nearly always film. You become part of it. For us, so that's one thing. Also, visual anthropology tries as much as is possible to be objective. Of course, you cannot be objective at all. We're all totally influenced by everything. But the starting point of the filmmaker here is to try to be objective as much as possible, to observe what's happening without dramatizing things more. So that's why, especially when you talk about Israel and Palestine, things, words, terms are very loaded. Whether you say Palestinian or Arab, they refer to the same thing, but one is, they have a very big political meaning. If you say occupation, it's a word that has a big meaning. It has a political meaning. So as an anthropologist, you try to observe the lives of people, and in a way, we try to step into the shoes of our protagonists, of our families, and view their world from their perspective. So we try to film how they live, from their way of living and from their way of seeing the world. And it was more about their experience in their life than to explain the conflict. If you want to understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you can open Wikipedia or see films that explain about it. That wasn't our motive. What was important to us was to give the audience a feeling of how it is to live in such a situation. And this doesn't necessarily have to be Palestine, Israel. It can be any situation. Doesn't matter who is the prime minister or who is, you know, that doesn't matter. The most important for us is how is it for a child to grow up in a situation which is a very complicated and even dangerous situation. So
great. last question. Do you have plans to return to Hebron and to do your next movie, or what is your next project? Would you like to talk about it? You don't have to.
We definitely plan to go back there because we made so many friends, and we want to show the film as well. I don't have yet a concrete next plan of Hebron. I filmed in Hebron since 2009, and I'm okay to have a little break for now. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop making films, but for now I'm going to focus on something different, maybe on circus projects around the world and something a bit less heavy than Hebron. But for sure, I really want to go back there and meet the families and have coffee with my friends, and yeah.
So for me, working in Hebron was during 7 years was a very revealing process. I think I'm still trying to understand what happened. Of course, we just finished the film. We left Hebron in March 2020. I think we were the last plane to fly out of Israel before Holland locked down because of Corona, and we edited this film throughout the last summer. So personally, I'm still very much processing what happened. There was a lot going on behind the scenes of this film. So I'm not in any particular rush to go back there to film. Definitely want to go back to show the film there, to keep our promise to the people that we would come back and show them what we're doing. That would be a great honor. But in terms of my next projects, I have a few things that I'm pitching right now. Of course, because of Corona, there's not much traveling going on. So I'm actually pleased to say that I'm focusing on some projects in Holland, which is really nice for a change. I usually work in Africa and in South America. Most of my work is, my background is wildlife documentary filmmaking, so pure observational filmmaking. But you can't go to Africa, you can't go to Brazil, so it's nice to think about maybe smaller projects. One thing about Corona, just to be much more local. But I'm very sorry that we can't be with you there. I think that's one of the things we're really missing, is the ability to be in Munich. As far as I know, the film right now has been picked up by a few festivals around Europe and Italy and other places, and also some international television broadcasts that are coming on. But I personally really missed sitting there with you right now in that theater in Germany, in Munich. So, yeah.
So I'm very happy that I had the chance to talk with you, because I know the place a little bit from my own biography. So I was really a little bit provoked when I saw the beginning of the film, and I understood so much and had a long time of thinking about it now before we are talking about your piece. And I would really like to thank you very much for your work, and especially for the opportunity to talk with you about it. Thank you very much. I hope that many, many people can watch this and watch your film. And of course, come back to cinemas, as you will come back to cinemas hopefully soon, and share your experiences. Thank you very much.